Welcome back to season 2 of Behind the Drapes. For those of you who caught season 1, that was all about getting to know the anesthesiologist in our department. Hopefully inspired some of you out there to go into anesthesia or even go into medicine. The second season, hoping to attract a broader audience around medicine now that we're talking about money. Something very important to people and something that often gets forgotten about in medical school education. And residents and attendings find themselves in a situation where they start making a lot of money, they don't really know what to do with their money, and they can't stretch their money as far as somebody else who had some financial literacy taught in their background. So for my first guest for this season, I'm welcoming back Dr. Shyamal Asher, who is somebody who actually lectures the medical students at Brown University about this topic. So when I was coming up with the idea of how I was going to organize this season, I actually went to his lecture, took down a bunch of notes, basically chopped up this season along the way that his lecture went, and we came up with some good information that I think a lot of you are going to enjoy. So without further ado, welcome back, Shyamal, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me back. I feel honored. I was the opening act for season 1, and I guess I'm opening act for season 2.
That's right. Yeah, I guess you must have made a pretty decent impression on season 1.
Yeah, I guess so. And I love listening along to all your different episodes, and I've been sort of keeping track as the episodes are dropping, and every day I'm learning something new. So I'm really enjoying your work.
Great. And I hope a lot of people learn even more from this season. Like I mentioned, it's not something that's very taught. It's not taught often in medical school education, but something that's really important. And I think one thing that you did really well when you were talking to the fourth year medical students was starting your presentation with why it's so important. Money is something that's uncomfortable to talk about, and it's not something we talk about normally in social settings. But you have sort of positioned yourself where now your colleagues are coming to you for financial advice because you seem to have a little bit of a step up in knowledge base. And so I think resources like you are important, and hopefully resources like this podcast are important. So why don't you start off by telling us why this is so important?
Yeah, I think that medical school rightly focuses on the medicine, learning the medicine, learning the basic sciences initially, which sort of comes at a very high volume. So it's very stressful. Step 1, step 2 exams are very high stakes exams. So rightly, the focus is learning on the medicine side. And then the clinical years come through, and we're trying to just figure out what we want to do with our lives. So the first, the third and the beginning of fourth year tends to be focused very much on clinical medicine. And we don't, unfortunately, we learn a lot about how to be good doctors, how to take good care of our patients, but unfortunately, we don't really learn about the business side of medicine. And of course, healthcare in America is sort of one of the highest component of American GDP. So healthcare is a business. So after you're done medical school, after you're done with residency, the business side of medicine hits you, and many providers are not sort of ready or prepared. So I think that more so now, I think it's becoming recognized that it is very important to learn. So the business side of medicine, both from the sort of medicine aspect of it, RVUs, how doctors get paid, how hospital billing occurs, insurance, working through those components, as well as personal finance, how we as physicians should be handling our money. So, I mean, I became first interested in it just by going through the process. So I was a resident and starting to, I didn't really know much about, retirement plans and budgeting and saving. And I kind of was sort of thrown into it. And as many people do, we go to some free dinners that are provided by, financial advisors or wealth planners. And that's when you first hear of some of these concepts. And I was always skeptical, so I kind of wanted to learn it myself. So I took it upon myself to go get a business degree. So I actually, while I was a senior resident, I applied to get a part-time MBA at University of Chicago, where I was training. So Booth School of Medicine is a pretty strong business school, and I was able to join it on a part-time basis when I became junior faculty at University of Chicago. So I think that really is the intrinsic interest. And then when I actually pursued the degree, I really learned the nuts and bolts of what goes on in the finance world. Of course, the business degree is much more broad, but I try to hone in and focus in on some of the more topics that are relevant for personal finance. So I think that's where I really learned a lot more about the details. I applied it to my own personal finance situation. And when I came to Brown, I wanted to sort of share what I was learning. So I approached the medical school to give a sort of commercial bias free. Basically, I'm not trying to sell anything to anybody. I'm just trying to educate the medical students on what I think medical students should know when they're graduating medical school, because many of them are for the very first time entering the workforce, for the very first time encountering things like retirement plans, and maybe even their very first real paycheck. Maybe they've done odd jobs, but this is the first time they're going to be getting, paychecks on a weekly or monthly, bi-weekly or monthly basis. So I wanted to share what I thought are the lessons that I learned that I wish I had known when I was a fourth year student. And that's really the genesis of the personal finance talk for graduating medical students that I've now been giving for 3 years at the medical school. So that's a long-winded way about how sort of I got involved in all of this. But to answer your question about why this is important, I think the lack of knowledge tends to be a stressor for a lot of students. And we're talking about the students now that have a lot of medical debt or student debt that they've garnered through medical school. So I'm not talking about those that have well-off parents and have been sort of living off the sort of going free ride through the medical school and undergrad. So doesn't really apply to those. So I myself had a bunch of student loans when I graduated, and all of a sudden at the end of graduation I was like, oh, I gotta start paying this back. During medical school was great. I was getting free money. I didn't really understand where it was coming from, what the consequences were. I was just signing the promissory note and saying, okay, great, thanks for the money. So that's really when it first hit me. So when you become a resident, and now you're, of course, in residency, the hours are long, you're learning medicine, you're for the first time taking care of patients, and at the same time, you start getting your statements for student loan payments and, all the other stuff, retirement planning, things like that. So I think that stressor is the reason why we need to really at least spend some time during medical school, and especially as you're getting ready to join residency, to understand basics of financial literacy. And it has been shown in studies that financial literacy amongst medical students and residents is very poor, less than average college students that we score at a much lower rate. And that tends to be a stressor. And that's also been shown in studies where they looked at resident student debt as a marker for their financial literacy, and then their emotional exhaustion or burnout rate during residency. And they found a pretty nice correlation this was an internal medicine resident study, 16,000 residents, was a large study. And as your education debt goes up, the rate of burnout actually goes up as well. So there's that association that when there's a lot of other things going on in life, when your own personal life, you're kind of worried about your own financial situation, you're more likely to also have stressors at work and not have the coping mechanisms, and that sort of leads to burnout. So I think it's a long-winded way of saying that is why I think learning financial literacy is important. I think it allows us to be better doctors and take care of our patients a little bit better, and that's really why the message I try to deliver to the medical students.
Now that you're sort of on like the attending side of things, do you see some of that burnout come into play for people who feel like they sort of missed the ball or weren't aware of some of the financial strategies until later on in life?
Absolutely. I think it is still a factor. I think we don't talk about money much in terms of the medical field in general. It's like a taboo topic. So I think when people do have financial stressors, they're much less likely to talk about it with their colleagues, as opposed to, when you're having a medical crisis in terms, a patient doesn't do well, you're more likely to kind of, even then it's hard, but people are more likely to ask some colleagues about it and sort of work through what could have been done better. But when it comes to these sort of finance or money matters, it's a taboo topic amongst attendings and residents and students. So no one talks about any of it. The reality is that everybody has those stressors. Everybody's going through the same thing. And, but for some reason, maybe it's just like the way medicine sort of has developed, that we kind of want to focus only on patient care and focus on those kind of factors and not think about money at all. That's probably why healthcare costs are out of control, because we don't think about the costs of what healthcare we're delivering. So that also leads to problems. And
Very
for
true.
us, it leads to problems because everyone's dealing with the same issues, but they don't talk amongst themselves, and leads to stress at home. And the reality is, a doctor that's not happy, with their whatever finances, it's very hard for them to focus and sort of be fully present and take full care of their patients. So I think it's still true, and I do get some, as you said, some attendings come and talk to me about things like this, especially after they see the MBA on my badge, and they're like, "Oh, tell me more about the MBA." And then I kind of go into some of the details, and then they ask me, "Oh, well, my financial advisor was talking to me about this product or this product. Do you have any knowledge about it?" So I think those kind of avenues make it okay, socially acceptable to ask about finances, but
Hmm.
nobody normally won't bring it up, even if everyone's going through the same thing.
Yeah, taboo is definitely a good way to describe it. I think altruism is kind of what is like a pillar in medical school education, which sort of feeds into this tabooism behind it. But hopefully, having discussions like this helps make it more collective and like we're on the same team and we're all trying to make life a little bit easier and less stressful for each other. One of the first sort of financial guides that I had from a medicine perspective was White Coat Investor. I think probably most people who have gone through the medical school education have heard of this. One of the topics that he talks about is financial independence, and that term has sort of become more of a buzzword. Maybe it just seems like in my generation because I'm now in this world, but it seems to come up more and more often where you're working because you want to, not because you have to. And you and I have had conversations about what this means personally for you. We've also had conversations about how financial plans are personal plans. So not one, it's not a one size fits all. But I'm curious what financial independence means to you and what are some of the goals that, or what are some of the steps that you're taking to get to that goal?
Yeah, so financial independence is a very common sort of term that is in this personal finance circles. And I agree, White Coat Investor was like the granddaddy of physician finance. There are many others. And that just goes to show the demand for this, because these folks have made careers out of it. That's their full-time job to be they're, most of them doctors who are focused on personal finance. And you're right, they're the ones breaking the taboo and sort of talking about this more. So I also follow most of these blogs and podcasts and sort of try to keep up with what's going on. So financial independence, there's a movement called the FIRE movement that is actually not out of the physician circles. It's just out of the sort of um, general personal finance circles, and it's called Financial Independence Retire Early. Don't think it applies as well for medicine, especially because many of us spend decades with, in medical school and training, and we spend a long time honing our skills, and we peak really the second half of our career. Really early
Hmm.
attendings are still learning things, are peaking later. So the retire early part doesn't necessarily apply as well, but the financial independence part absolutely does. And exactly as you described it, it allows us to work because we want to work rather than because we have to work. And you can think of how that allows us to be better doctors. So if you are running your own clinic and you have a certain number of patients to see, and you think that you need 30 minutes to see a patient, and spend enough time with them, learn enough about them so that you can provide the best care and the best help. However, there's going to be an administrator somewhere. If this is not your own personal practice, there's an administrator somewhere that'll come and say, you know what, you're not producing enough, so you need to see your patients in 15 minutes. And this has happened in primary care world. This is like, it was a big thing when I was a medical student too. So financially, for a person who relies on their paycheck coming from work cannot just say, no, I don't agree with you. I am just going to go ahead and see my patients in 30 minutes, and you can go and cut my paycheck. You can't say that if you rely on that paycheck. But a financially independent doctor who's working because they want to be able to work, they want to be able to take better care of their patients, will prioritize taking care of the patients. So they are in that position to say, no, I need 30 minutes to see these kind of patients, and we can negotiate some other tactics to make the practice or clinic be still remain profitable, but I'm not going to sacrifice patient care over it. So that I think is a very practical example of why we should all be aiming for financial independence, because obviously when we come out of training, we all have student loans, we all have need for money, whether it's, a house and children and sort of establishing your life. But at some point, if you reach that financial independence goal, then you can really focus in on the things that actually matter. So I think that is why we should all sort of be incorporating financial literacy in medical training, because we all want to get to that position where we can say, you know what, it is not about the money anymore. I would like to sort of focus in on what's important to me, and whether that be patient care, spending time, enough time that you think you can have the impact you need to have. So financial independence is really the goal of financial literacy. It's not so that we can all make more money or sort of be, billionaires. That's really not where this is at. In fact, if you wanted to do that, medicine is not the way to go, right? Business is the way to go. But most people don't go into medicine wanting to do that. Most people want to take care of patients, but it's hard to take care of patients when you have not taken care of yourself. So this is one of those tools, financial literacy, to achieve financial independence, so that you've taken care of yourself on those aspects so you can take better care of your patients.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about taking care of yourself, one of the first things that financial advisors, when you talk to them or they take you out to these dinners, they'll usually end the conversation starting to talk about disability insurance, plus or minus life insurance. How did you go about that decision-making process in your own way of protecting yourself in your career?
Yeah, I think most people who have little knowledge about finances and sort of personal finance world, they get their first exposure through these free dinners. And I certainly had that in my residency, where somebody would hand out a flyer and say, hey, there's a free dinner at the steakhouse given by this wealth management company. Come for the free dinner and you may get a talk on the side. No obligation, no obligation to you. And so, many people do that. And one of the, you kind of get some general advice about things, but the focus of the talk ends up being disability insurance. And the reality is that is a big, big moneymaker for most of these folks. They actually earn the amount of disability insurance you sign up for. That first year is their payment for that year. So you can imagine if you sign up for a $50,000 premium disability insurance and they sign up 10 people, that's $500,000 that they have just earned. So
Yeah.
Sign up is the hard part. It's kind of like these credit card bonuses, right? They get you a large bonus to sign up for the credit card, because once you're in, it's going to be hard for you. That inertia will comes in, so people don't like stop, and then you will end up paying fees down the line, and they'll make up that money from you. So it's the same with these insurance products. They want you to sign up and then hope that you'll just forget about it and it'll just kind of be an automatic debit out of your account. So that's kind of how I learned about it. And I think it's important. I actually wrote a little blog post on the ASA website about the importance of disability insurance. And I mean, all of this planning that we do, the financial planning, the retirement plans, and the college plans, all rely on us being able to work and earn the income that we're earning. Mm-hmm. So all our plans really rely on our ability to work, because that is the cornerstone of most physician financial plans. And if you're not able to work, you need to have a backup plan. So you want to always insure against catastrophic events. So if something really bad happens and we are not able to perform the task that's required of you, so in our world, in anesthesia, you're on your feet all day long, you're working with your hands, and it is very sort of manually taxing. So if you're unable to do those tasks, you can no longer be an anesthesiologist. You can no longer earn that salary. All the financial plans go down the drain. So it's very important to insure against that and insure yourself enough so that you're able to maintain, this basic plan that you have, because most of the time the plans are focused on family and kids and, things like that. You want to be able to maintain that lifestyle that you have. It's really hard as a resident thinking about disability insurance, because most of the time residents are young and healthy and do not have much medical problems, and they feel pretty invincible. In their 20s, they're like, oh, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm going to be just fine. I don't need this product. But I would argue the reason you need disability insurance as a resident is because you're young and healthy. So you can get not only the best rate because you don't have any medical issues, so you're fully covered. And you then, once you're in the system, if you develop medical issues later, like if you get your disability insurance as a CA1 and then as a CA3, you break your knee skiing, that knee injury is already part of the insurance policy. So if you have any issues down the line and you cannot, stand and do your anesthesia anymore, you will be covered. As opposed to the flip side, that you do not have disability insurance and then you get a knee injury, then all of a sudden there'll be an exclusion that any issue related to the knee injury will not be covered by the disability insurance. And of course, that would be a big problem for specialty where you're standing all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think disability insurance is definitely very important. And in that blog post, I talk about that. And I talk about very specific things about what kinds of factors we should look for. And we can go into it if you like, or, that can certainly be a whole separate episode about what different riders that are important for resident level or trainees to purchase to sort of secure them for the future. But my decision process, really, I did wait. I kind of waited until my CA2 or CA3 year. I didn't buy it right away because of sort of the same reasons that I've been saying. And then when I ended up buying it, again, the reason to buy it is because you're healthy at that time, but it's not that important to buy the full policy. So they will try to sell you the largest policy because that's how they make the money, the insurance agents. But I came back and said, that is not affordable to me at a resident salary. And can you give me the lowest possible policy? And they actually cut it down for me. And remember, the goal is just to get in. And then you have a rider, which is a future purchase rider, where when you become an attending and your salary goes up, you submit that documentation and they'll allow you to increase your disability insurance at that point. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really matter how much of a disability insurance, at least in my mind at the time, that I buy as a resident. So I bought a cheaper level, so I have paid less. And then as soon as I became an attending and I could afford to pay a little bit more, I upgraded my insurance policy. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I thought of it. And that is something that was not sold to me. Nobody told me that. I kind of had to sort of work hard to get that. So One of the things I do say is, that, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like they want you to buy the highest possible amount because that's what that's what they're selling to you. Doesn't mean you have to go there, and it doesn't have to be the best possible policy. If it doesn't work for your finances, it's worse to say, what, I'm not going to buy anything at all. That's worse. Buy something in between and plan on increasing as you go forward.
Mm-hmm. Solid, very solid. How about life insurance?
Yeah, so you rightly said personal finance is personal. So all these things we talk about and you're going to be talking about during your upcoming episodes this season, all of those factors have to be they're very generalized. The topics and the advice that people give on these topics are generalized and what you read about in blogs and podcasts. But at the end of the day, the individual has to funnel that information and make it work for them, because the way it is presented may not work for the individual. And the worst possible thing you can do is just say, this is not for me. There is some amount, you should at least engage in some of these things, depending on your personal situation. Even if you can't fully, for example, max out the Roth IRA as a resident, even if you can't fully do it, at least do something, because these are important steps in the personal finance journey and the personal finance goals. And the problem is people present, max out your Roth IRA, it's $6,500 for this year. And the resident's like, I don't have $6,500 so this year, so I'm not going to do any of it at all. You would have been better off, giving at least, 1 or 2,000, whatever you can afford. Mm-hmm. So the same thing with life insurance. It's, personal finance is personal. So it depends on, are there dependents in your life that depend on your income? Or so if you drop dead the next day, is there somebody who relies on you in order to be able to live? So do you have a spouse, children? Do you have a house and a mortgage that needs to be paid? So all those factors come in life insurance. Again, life insurance when you're young is relatively cheap. So, it's not very expensive, but it's just like, oh, why do I need life insurance right now? I'm young and I'm healthy. I don't need it.
Right.
But so I personally did not buy it actually until I got married, until I had a house and a mortgage and people relied on my income. That's when I purchased my life insurance policy. I did not buy it as a resident, but again, not everyone's the same. But there's a couple types of life insurance. There's something called a term life insurance, which basically is a life insurance policy that is for a certain amount of time, which is the term. So it could be a 10-year, 20-year, or 30-year term insurance policy. That is very cheap. It is money that you will put into the insurance policy. And if you were to die within the term of the policy, then you would get the payout for whatever the policy you have bought. And that is the cheap version. There's a more expensive version called whole life insurance. That is sold as, you pay more, but some of that money gets invested into the market by the insurance company. And the thought is that as you get older, you have put a certain amount of money on it, you will actually get a return later on in life if you actually survive the time. So it's called whole life insurance because it gives you money back if you in fact survive when you're 65, 70, or whatever the amount of time it is.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is there's a conflict of interest there that the agents tend to make more money with whole life insurance than they make with term life insurance. Term life insurance actually is very cheap. You can go buy it online without too much. There's like online websites you can buy it off of.
Uh-huh.
But unfortunately, whole life insurance is pushed a lot towards doctors, and you can Google this, and White Coat Investor and all these other websites have a whole bunch of articles on it. And they sell it as you'll get something back, you'll get money back. But the reality is it's not as good as what you would get back if you were to just invest that money on your side yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So the mantra that most people say is you do not want to mix insurance policies and investing. You want to keep those separate. So buy the term life insurance, which is cheap, and whatever money you save, you actually invest it yourself, and you're not relying on an insurance company to then invest that money from you.
Fascinating. All right, last question to tie things up, which I thought was very interesting the last time we talked about this. How do you treat cell phone insurance or like trip insurance?
Yeah, so this actually comes out of my time at University of Chicago at Booth. Behavioral economics is sort of a burgeoning field within finance. Like we used to think that human beings made decisions very objectively without any emotions. We used to think that people would kind of weigh pros and cons, just like the economic models would suggest, and realize that, oh, this is objectively better than that. In real life, people completely make decisions emotionally.
Right.
So I buy a phone and I have a brand new phone. So emotionally, I'm so invested in this phone that I will pay more money towards the cell phone carrier people to protect my phone. Even though the phone is just, objectively you bought it. When you buy it, the day you buy it, it depreciates, right? Like when you buy a phone today, you go sell back the next day, you're going to get less money than you bought it for.
Right.
Yet we actually put money into it because psychologically, this is like a brand new phone. It is a lot of value. So the behavioral finance, I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's selling you an insurance product, they're clearly making money out of it, right? Like you're not coming ahead. So yes, there'll be stories of people say, oh yeah, I bought phone insurance, my phone broke and they paid for it. It was great. But on average, in general, for all the insurance policies that we buy as individuals, we're actually going to be losing out at the end of it. So the advice is that you only buy insurance for catastrophic losses. So disability insurance, if you get disabled, that is a catastrophe. You should insure against that. Home insurance, if their home burns down tomorrow, you want to have insurance to cover that because that's a large amount of money. But these kind of small insurance, like your $1,000 cell phone, the best route would be, instead of paying whatever it is, $8 or $10 a month that they charge, take that money and put that in your emergency fund. So you can self-insure against that cell phone, self-insure against your computer that you bought. So you have an emergency fund and you've assigned it just for that reason, that you're now, instead of giving the money away to, Apple or AT&T or whatever for insurance against the phone, you just self-insure against it. So anything that can be replaced, so that is any consumer item, your phone, your laptop, and even trip insurance. I mean, depending on how expensive that trip is, like you probably should self-insure against that instead of buying all of these things. Things like a car, if you have $100,000 whatever Tesla, that's, that thing breaks, you want to have insurance against it. But even then, you do not need the full comprehensive coverage. You can have a higher deductible, and which then again, you save that savings into your emergency fund so you can save it. So yeah, it's very fascinating. That's a way of thinking I did not really appreciate until I, sort of went through some of these classes. And then since then, I've sort of been very interested in, behavioral finance. So there's a lot of resources on that about like the psychology of money, like how do we actually think about money? And I try to sort of bring that out during that talk. It's not just like facts or these are the things you should do. I try to spend some time in how you should think about, medical students don't make any money. As residents, they make a stipend, and then all of a sudden they become attendings, and many times, the income quadruples, and
Right.
the resident is still in resident mode, thinking about money as a resident. And then if your income quadruples, of course they're not prepared, and they're not able to handle, that change in their finance. So this is
Right.
why doctors get in trouble. So insurance is one of those sort of tricks that I sort of appreciate. I've applied in my own life, and again, it's this is a lifelong, it's a long term. So sometimes I feel like, oh, if I had insurance, that would have been nice. But I have to remember this is a long term. Over the next 10, 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
I'm probably going to come out ahead.
Great. Great. This was a fantastic way to start the season, I think. We covered why it's important, things to look out for, and how human nature really impacts all the decisions we make, even if we think we're going to be objective about financial decisions. I think emotions are so powerful, and it's good to be introspective about it.
Absolutely. I would encourage your listeners to sort of stay engaged during this whole season, because especially for folks who are not well versed in some of these finance topics you're going to talk about, the very first step is just knowing, just like taking the step, saying, I just want to learn this information, or at least hear about this information. And you don't have to like know it at the end of the podcast, be like, okay, I know exactly what I need to do with my retirement account tomorrow.
Right.
No, the goal is really to get you thinking, so that you can then look it up, because there's plenty of online information now, and from reliable websites like, physician websites that again have made careers out of this. And you can then be educated enough to understand some of these differences. And we have professional degrees, right? We've studied Krebs cycles and memorized those. This is not hard. It is just scary because we don't know anything about it. But I think the message should be sort of, learn the basic terminology. Anything that gets advanced, you can just go look it up, and trust me, you can kind of figure it out, yourself. So I'm excited for this rest of the season, and I'm definitely going to be tuning in.
Excellent. And I encourage everyone to stay tuned. We're going to do an episode just about student loans on its own, which I think is something that really pulls at the heartstrings of a lot of medical students as they're graduating, and even residents as they start making payments, even though we're in this sort of funny period right now where payments are on pause. But I think realistically, we know that's not forever. So it's something that weighs heavily on students and residents. So stay tuned for that one. Well, Dr. Asher, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me again.
Of course. We'll catch you next time.